It seems incredible to me that when Trump said at Davos that he wanted NATO members to increase their spending to 5% and was met with a room full of blank stares, and now, a few weeks later, after an enormous diplomatic fallout between the US and Europe, European leaders have hastily gathered in London to announce that they are going to increase defence spending.
We cannot accept a weak deal like Minsk, which Russia can breach with ease. Instead, any deal must be backed by strength. Every nation must contribute to that in the best way that it can, bringing different capabilities and support to the table, but all taking responsibility to act, all stepping up their own share of the burden. So we agreed some important steps today. First, we will keep the military aid flowing and keep increasing the economic pressure on Russia to strengthen Ukraine now. Second, we agreed that any lasting peace must ensure Ukraine's sovereignty and security, and Ukraine must be at the table. Third, in the event of a peace deal, we will keep boosting Ukraine's own defensive capabilities to deter any future invasion. Fourth, we will go further to develop a coalition of the willing to defend a deal in Ukraine and to guarantee the peace. Not every nation will feel able to contribute, but that can't mean that we sit back. Instead, those willing will intensify planning now with real urgency. The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air, together with us.
It's interesting to note that Starmer mentions not everyone will be able to contribute. Many European countries are below the current 2% NATO target, and countries like Italy and France are in no real position to start increasing defence spending without serious tax rises or spending cuts, and more borrowing could spark a market panic and a run on bonds. I think European elites are seriously biting off more than they can chew, and that this might have a seriously destabilising effect on the EU as a whole. Germany will be required to foot the lion's share of the bill, while their industry is the one suffering the most from sanctions on Russia. The Eastern Bloc states will be required to provide most of the manpower, as the Western European states are full of Zoomers who are unwilling to fight and probably wouldn't be much help in a combat situation anyway. After the failure of Operation Poseidon Archer, meant to protect shipping lanes in the Gulf, it is worth noting that only British and American vessels took part. Now the Europeans want to commit themselves to a decade-long peacekeeping operation in Ukraine. If you want an idea of how open-ended these things can be, Britain still has troops in Kosovo, and America still has troops in Germany for the past 80 years. Flashy summits of European leaders talking tough might give a temporary boost in the polls, but that will change when you need to start selling harsh economic choices to voters so they can continue to live under the shadow of thermonuclear war. It really is back to the 80s. The jingoistic fervour will soon pass. Starmer admits that they still need the support of the US, and if Europe were truly to try and go it alone, they would have to increase their average defence spending to 5% of GDP, and a lot of that would have to go on logistics. That would not necessarily increase their frontline presence. European defence spending already doubles Russian, but they are a decade behind in hypersonic missiles, and most European air forces heavily rely on the US-made F-35, with 6th-generation fighter jets not entering service until the 2040s. If Europe is about to go on a rearmament drive, it couldn't have a worse leader than Ursula von der Leyen, who has already been investigated in her native Germany for a scandal involving hundreds of millions of euros going to external consultants during her time as defense minister. It seems Putin has achieved his major objectives of protecting Russian speakers in the Donbass and maintaining access to the warm water port of Sevastopol. I probably pronounced that wrong, but the port in Crimea. He is unlikely to negotiate those away. But with the fall of Assad in Syria, threatening Russian access to its only Mediterranean port, it has hardly upset the strategic balance. The Russian Navy is small and mainly submarine-based. And if Putin couldn't take Kiev, how is he going to advance on European capitals further west, beyond the big red line of NATO states and Article 5? Barring a full-blown nuclear confrontation, Russia is not a genuine threat to Europe, as long as the US remains committed to NATO. One day the Europeans may come to regret their sneering ingratitude to the NATO alliance. As for Starmer, it seems to me that he thinks this crisis is his Falklands War. That he can use this moment on the world stage to boost his flagging domestic popularity, and it might have a short-term effect. No doubt the Dark Lord approves. But this is not the Falklands, and will not be a swift, morale-boosting victory. The election is a long way off, and as the cost of the peacekeeping operation mounts, its domestic support will crumble as electorates resist the tax rises or spending cuts required to maintain it. Then the European infighting about who is not paying their fair share will begin, and the long-suffering German taxpayer will probably end up footing the bill. Even the Vietnam and Iraq wars had a slight majority approval when they began. They are not so fondly remembered now. The Ukraine peacekeeping operation would be expensive and risky, and European elites, in their hubris, might have just bitten off more than they can chew.